Welcome everyone to Helping Victorians Get Fair Outcomes as part of Law Week 2020. I'm Lynn Holtane, I'm from the Victoria Law Foundation, and it is my enormous pleasure to introduce you to a forum of ombudsmen to talk about the impact not only of their work generally, but of their work at this particular juncture with the impact of COVID-19 and all the responses that government and organisations have made to that. It's a very challenging time, and ombudsmen play a really critical role in addressing complaints and concerns when people are under stress as they are at the moment. So we have, I think, an exceptional roundup of ombudsmen for you in Cynthia Gabert from the Energy and Water Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, who's the Victorian Ombudsman, Judy Jones, who's the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, and John Price, who's the lead Ombudsman in Insurance from the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. So thank you all indeed, very much indeed for your time. Before we start talking about the impact of the pandemic and what that's meant for your work, let's just get a sense, I think, for lay people about what ombudsmen do. Deborah, do you want to pick that up?
Absolutely. Well, let's just look at what the word means. Ombudsman is a Swedish word. It loosely translates to defender of the people. And I think what that means in practical terms is that it's fundamentally about the imbalance of power. Think of it in these terms. As an individual, you've got a grievance against the government, against a big corporation. How do you deal with that? Well, that's what ombudsmen do. In my case, it's about the imbalance of power between the individual and the state. In the case of my industry ombudsman colleagues, it's about the imbalance of power between you as an individual and these big corporates, these big telcos or banks or insurance companies or whatever, who actually have all of this power over whatever it is they're doing to you. So if you've got a grievance against one of these big entities, that's what the Ombudsman is here to help you with.
But why do we need an external party to do that? Don't we have, complaints mechanisms within government, within corporates that people can pursue? Why do you need the Ombudsman to come in on your behalf?
Because they don't always work. We all live in hope, all of us in the ombudsman world, that governments will do it better. And we actually spend quite a lot of time working with agencies, in my case, local councils, government entities, to get them to respond better to the public they serve. But they don't always get it right. And there is this incredibly important role for an independent entity. And ombudsmen are independent. We are not part of the government, the agencies, the big corporates who people might be complaining about. And we can provide that independent and indeed powerful perspective.
As you've pointed out, Deborah, there are industry ombudsmen and government ombudsmen, for want of a better phrase in terms of division. Judy, you are an industry ombudsman, the telecommunications industry ombudsman. Do you think people have a broad grasp of what it is you can do for them? Because I know from personal experience how effective the TIO can be.
I think they do in that practical sense. So I think people understand they're a bit like the umpire or the ref at the footy, that we are the ones when there's no more conversations to be had. When you're at an impasse, you might be looking at the same information or in fact looking at different information. And you can come to us and we can look at it all and say what we think is fair and reasonable. So we actually surveyed consumers about what they thought an ombudsman was, and they pretty much got it right. That independent role, that person who can call it as they see it from an independent standpoint. So yeah, I think it's I think particularly if you've used our services, then you instantly get it.
Do you get a sense, though, that people don't necessarily know that you're there, or is the telecommunications industry, in your case, pretty good at letting people know that if they've got a concern, they can come to you?
Well, it never fails to amaze me who doesn't know that we exist. So, I still go to social gatherings, well, I used to, before the pandemic,
Yes.
and talk to people there who didn't know that we existed. We've been going for over 25 years now. So we have a pretty good understanding, and I think people, when they're embroiled in a complaint, often find it's useful to say, well, I'm going to go to the Ombudsman. But there is a surprising number of people who don't know we exist. It's a constant challenge for us to get the message out there. We're easy to access. You pick up the phone, you jump online, we listen, we facilitate the conversation. It's a good news story that we exist.
As is often the case with good news stories, sometimes they fall off the radar. Cynthia, do people know that the Energy and Water Ombudsman exists?
Definitely not as much as we'd like. I think, one of the challenges for us is actually making sure people know we're around when they need us. And it's not the sort of thing that you'd necessarily retain. There's got to be an ombudsman for this until you're in a situation where you're feeling that there's a wrong that needs to be righted. And I think, just picking up on the commentary before, there is still a lot of opportunity for, in my case, the energy and water businesses to be getting better at letting people know of their right to complain. Not just their right to complain through the internal processes of businesses, but there is actually an external body who's free and independent, who, if you're not happy with the response you're getting from your energy and water company, there is someone else who might have a different take on it because they're one step removed, they're independent, and they're looking at it more objectively.
Yeah, that notion of the free service is also critical to the service that Ombudsman provide, that this is both independent and comes at no cost. So it's not a legal process, but it is often extremely effective. Why do we have so many different ombudsmen, though, do you think? I mean, we've got 4 of you online today. Why do we need so many, given that you're all running pretty similar processes in terms of reviewing people's complaints and then addressing those with the provider?
I think that's an excellent question, and there are I think we're regularly told there's a proliferation of ombudsmen, but we are all working in different industries as well. So while our core skills are in independent dispute resolution, investigation, and maintaining that objectivity, there are certain skills that come with insurance, banking, finance that are quite different in technical terms than, say, telco or energy and water. And there's another complexity too, that there's a definite proliferation of energy and water ombudsmen because there's state-based legislation. So I think there might even be 7 or 8 of me around Australia. So we just make it even more complex, whereas you've got national schemes like telco and AFCA, but you've got even more energy and water ombudsmen because state-based regulation.
I suppose that means, though, that you know your space very intimately. I mean, you know your providers and you know your legislation and you can facilitate more effectively.
I think it brings that specialisation to our knowledge, that you wouldn't, you'd have to package it differently if we were big schemes, ombudsmen that covered every service in Australia.
Now we are daring to enter the Collingwood man cave to catch up with John. John, I'm interested to know also how ombudsmen's roles can transform over time, and you are front and centre in that. At least the Complaints Authority that you work for is, given the Banking Royal Commission and the impact that had. Is that an important process in moving with the times, if you like, as an ombudsman, and having to address new ways of doing things and new, community standards in what is acceptable behaviour from, for example, the insurance, banking, or superannuation sectors?
Yes, again, I think that's a very good question. What we're seeing at AFCA is that there are more and more people wanting to explore their rights, who don't understand why decisions have been made. But at the same time, we've found an industry, both banking and insurance, that are more consumer-centric than what they previously were. AFCA as an organisation received over 110,000, or has received over 110,000 disputes since November 2018 when it commenced. Effectively around then, I think it was within a couple of months of AFCA forming, the Royal Commission started, and these disputes were building at that time. Post-Royal Commission, we've had the announcement that the industry was to cooperate with AFCA with recommendation 4.11. But what we've in fact found is that they were already cooperating with AFCA beforehand, and the discussion with industry that we've been having has been around applying fairness in their decision-making process and understanding what fairness has been. Part of that has been going out and establishing a fairness framework and starting to talk to industry about that framework and how we go about as an organisation determining what's fair. We're not imposing it on the industry, but we're explaining to the industry what's necessary. What unfortunately COVID-19 has done has stalled that consultation process. But nevertheless, we've seen industry be extremely proactive as an organisation. I think we saw that with the Townsville floods. We saw, and we've definitely seen that with the Victorian and New South Wales bushfires, or the Australian bushfire season as it's been called, with the very low number of disputes that we're receiving from those areas. So we think that the Royal Commission has been a very positive thing for the industry. It's helped the industry wake up and understand what really people do require.
I think that notion of fairness is so central to all your work, and it requires negotiation and an awareness of both sides of any contest. But I'm interested also in how COVID-19 has had a bearing on that, because for so many people thrust into circumstances highly unfamiliar to themselves, they are now having to negotiate jobs, housing, all sorts of other factors that they may not have had to have dealt with before, which is having enormous financial pressure come to bear on people. So John, what sorts of complaints are you beginning to see come through as a result of COVID-19 that will also require the application of fairness?
Look, we're seeing complaints in the banking area, in particular financial difficulty. Again, the banks have responded very quickly to that with deferrals of loans, reduced interest rates, etc. We're seeing in the insurance space lots of complaints around travel, the cancellation, the fact that some policies do not cover cancellation, but also where people are cancelling their future travel arrangements and already have a travel policy, so people seeking refunds and cancellations. We're talking to the industry about that to develop an industry standard that will allow people to have refunds, that will allow people to get credits for their travel policy, meaningful credits, not a credit for 6 months, but a credit for 18 months or 2 years. And the industry is responding to that. So we're seeing that happen there. We're just starting to see some business interruption cases coming through. They are a bit more problematic, and so we will start to work through those problems as we see them. We can't anticipate what that will be. The flip side of COVID-19 is in the insurance space, there are fewer motor vehicle claims coming through. There are fewer home claims coming through. So there's a little bit of a positive in it, if you can take a positive spin from anything like this. So we are seeing that happen. The other thing what we have seen is that the industry, as an organisation, the insurance industry and the banking industry, are working to communicate with people. One of the lessons that AFCA has learned over the years in dealing with natural disasters is that working with the community, working with consumer groups, working with industry to get a clear, consistent, transparent communication happening with the affected community is the most effective way to deal with these type of issues. We can't always provide the answer that people want, but we can work with them, and that's the most effective way of being fair.
Deborah, I can't remember a time when government has been so interventionist on so many fronts, both state and federal. And in this instance, you have responsibility for engagement with the state and local government levels. What sort of complaints are you seeing coming through? Are people concerned about capacity to pay their council rates? What are the things you're seeing?
A very broad range. Indeed, one of the things I was expecting to see were hardship type cases. That all the complaints were going to be about council rates or enforcement or fines Victoria or inability to pay. That may yet happen, but we've had relatively few. And what I'm happy to report so far, obviously keeping a close eye on this, is that agencies on the whole have been pretty responsible in how they're handling this. We're seeing a whole series of different kinds of cases, though. So the impact of being at home means that we've had a lot of complaints about local councils dealing with nuisance or not dealing with nuisance, noisy neighbours, recycling and waste. More people are at home, the bins aren't going out often. So all kinds of things that I probably wouldn't have predicted. We're seeing in our we're seeing sort of thematically. And of course, the whole sort of closed environment aspect of this. People in quarantine are actually in closed environments. That comes with the Ombudsman's jurisdiction. We've had people complaining about that. And the whole prisons environment where prisoners are required to be in isolation for 14 days. So these are all generating, you might say, complaints to the office. But what we have found so far is a pretty positive response, where we'll say to the agency, well, have you thought about this, or what are you doing about it? And they do think and they do respond, and I'm very much hoping that continues.
Judy and Cynthia, you both work in areas where we would regard the services that your sectors provide as absolutely essential. Energy and water is, fundamental to human happiness and cleanliness, Cynthia. So what are you seeing come through? Are businesses and the main providers of energy and water utilities responding well?
I would probably echo Deborah's comments, actually, that we've been surprised by the nature of complaints that have come through. So as with Deborah, we would have expected there to be a greater number of customers experiencing payment difficulties. But there's a number of reasons why I think we haven't seen that yet. There has been a very strong response from the industry to get on the front foot in this unprecedented time and actually put their hand up and say, we are going to help customers. Obviously, customers need to put their hand up and let the industry know they need a hand, but the industry on the whole, both energy and water, have been very clearly on the front foot in recognising that this is an unprecedented impact for customers and doing a lot more to offer assistance. So we haven't seen it yet. We do think we will get a tsunami of complaints at some point in time, but we are seeing the I'm at home type complaints. So planned outages, there has to be maintenance done to the poles and wires in order to ensure they're safe and you have reliable supplies. But the impact for people if you're homeschooling, if you're at home because you're working from home, is much more significant than your normal Monday to Friday. You're out for a few hours, your power's off for 4 hours while they do some work on your on the poles and wires in your area. So that's an unusual complaint for us to be receiving, but a bit like Deborah, it's a bit of a sign of the shift in how people are working, how people are engaging much more broadly with their energy and water. So we're sort of waiting for high bill season to hit a bit earlier with more people at home. It's not going to be the extra streaming services or the use of the laptop that will cause people to struggle. It will be much more the increased usage of heating earlier for longer periods of time, as well as obviously the broader impacts of people with loss of income.
Absolutely. I think, I'm hearing across the board that people are waiting for the financial distress to really set in, but clearly anticipating that it will arrive in due course. Judy, I think for some of the reasons that Cynthia's described, homeschooling, working from home, connectivity at this point in time, and having access to government information and all up-to-date resources is more critical now than ever. And sometimes this is the home environment is where this is more difficult to achieve. My connectivity at work is fantastic, but not so much at home. What are you seeing come through the door?
Well, I echo Deborah and Cynthia that we haven't seen yet the financial distress complaints about not being able to meet payments. The providers, to their credit, particularly the bigger ones, have put in some special assistance packages. So, for example, some removing data caps on your home broadband, better mobile plans available, and also some have waived late payment fees. So there has been that response by the industry. They can see that this is we hope, once in a lifetime experience for us all, and that staying connected is so important right now. Socially, working from home, having your kids learning from home, all of those things mean so important to keep connected. And by and large, the network has stood up, which I think has been fantastic. So there were issues with the overseas call centres and the shutdown in the Philippines and in India. That impacted call centres for both my providers and Cynthia's. But the industry has been working really hard to get those call centres, whether they're in the Philippines or back here on shore, up and running. So that's starting to have a positive impact in call wait times and those sorts of things.
We talked earlier about the volume of complaints, the themes that you can see running through complaints. Does that give you an opportunity as Ombudsman to paint a bigger picture for government, to give them a very grassroots comprehension of what's happening to consumers on the ground at the moment, and therefore what might need to happen in terms of policy? Judy, are you getting any sense of what you might need to feed back to government in terms of what lessons we can learn out of this and what providers might need to change permanently?
Well, it's probably a bit early for us to tell. Yes, we've refocused the work of our systemics team that look at the patterns of complaints. They're interrogating or looking at the data every day and providing feedback to the telcos to highlight emerging issues for them so they can take action straight away. But we're about to release our quarterly report towards the end of this month, which will show some patterns. But as John said earlier, this has been bushfire season and now pandemic season. So our quarterly data, January to March, will reflect both of those. So it's a bit hard to pull out what applies to what. The best picture in the data is with the providers themselves. What are they seeing? They get far more complaints than we do. We get the harder to resolve complaints or where their systems have fallen down. So the providers themselves have been working with government, I know, in the telco space, have some agreed principles for responding to issues arising in the pandemic.
John, would you like to see any lessons come out of this at this point? I know for much of the landscape, it's a bit early to anticipate exactly what's going to stick after this and what's not. But you mentioned earlier that the finance sector has come a long way, and that the Banking Royal Commission has really woken them up, as you put it, to customers as a focus. Do you think the pandemic will have any long-lasting effect?
What we're finding is that the industry, banking, insurance and other financial firms are far more open to discussion, are far more conciliatory in their approach to matters. And I think that is a lesson that they are learning the benefit of approaching matters in that way. I think one of the concerns that has been expressed by the industry to myself in the insurance space is the long-term impact of COVID-19 in terms of people being underinsured or having cancelled insurance. The financial difficulty that it's imposing on people. In the insurance space, insurance is a discretionary product. People cancel their insurance or reduce their insurance because that's where they can save some dollars. But they may not get back to having proper insurance by next summer's bushfire season or the flood season, and that may continue for a couple of years. So the industry's alive to the fact that these issues aren't issues to be solved now, but we do need to have something in place to look at the future so that we're educating people properly about the various needs and their financial requirements. And we're really stepping up the financial literacy arguments. And I think that is probably a big lesson that will come out of this, is letting people know and keeping people informed about what really they should have if they want to be relatively protected in the future.
What will that look like, John, in terms of greater financial literacy? What will you do?
Well, from AFCA's point of view, we see we have an educational role, so it's very much within our website. It's doing community meetings. It's reinstating the AFCA Roadshow that was underway with us travelling around the country in a bus. That'll be reinstated when they open the borders and we have people up and running. I think it's working with the industry and consumer groups, attending as many functions as we can, doing webinars. What we have found, and one of the real strong takeouts from COVID-19, is that there will be new ways of working. People will be working from home and loving it. So the opportunity to educate using webinars and WebEx and Zoom and everything else, I think will be there. So I think there's lots of exciting ways it could change.
Yeah, I think we've sort of leapfrogged into a new confidence with Zoom and WebEx and Teams and all sorts of other platforms that we probably hadn't heard of before. So it's all easy as pie now. Cynthia, you were until quite recently, I understand, involved with ANZOA, the Australian New Zealand Ombudsman's Association, which gives you a higher understanding of what's happening across a number of jurisdictions. Is the Victorian experience pretty consistent with others, or are you seeing different themes emerge in different parts?
In terms of the energy and water ombudsman, we are seeing very, very similar themes. We met last week to talk about our various responses to COVID, and obviously there's national retailers across the energy sector, so there's an element of consistency of our experience across those businesses, but each of us have unique elements to our jurisdictions as well, which means that there's a lot that we can learn from each other, but there is a real consistency around an overall drop-off in complaints, concern about the financial difficulty that customers will find themselves experiencing in the future. But equally, that gives us an opportunity to have much greater impact if we are dealing with national retailers and we are working with them to try and lift the service that they're offering customers, think more creatively around what payment assistance they can be offering. We can sort of pick and choose different bits that are working really well and look to replicate that across all the different states.
So that broader perspective gives you a bit of leverage with your providers.
It does. And it's actually been really useful to try and get them to think about us as a group as well, rather than a series of individual stakeholders they need to manage. Because if, as Judy mentioned before, the call centres that might have gone down in the Philippines or India affected Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia. It didn't just affect one of us, it affected all of us. So trying to get them to actually think a lot more carefully around how do they share information with us, how do they think about the information we provide them individually as well as collectively, so that they're thinking much more whole of system rather than Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland.
Deborah, together with taking complaints about the way in which government operates, the Victorian Ombudsman, or you in that role, investigate misconduct. That's a very strong plank of your activity. And I must admit, I was thinking about, and John, this will, I'm sure, be resonant for you as well, the fact that a number of pillars of governance seem to have fallen away. I mean, in the past, we were always taught that if you were looking like you were trading insolvent, then you really should stop, and that was completely unacceptable. But now, there is, I think, much greater flexibility or awareness that people are in tricky times. So I suppose I'm wondering if there might come a point where you need to draw a line about expediency over integrity, and at what point that becomes a challenge, especially in the government context.
Well, I've no doubt that times of crisis present both significant risk and significant opportunity in all kinds of ways, some of them less desirable than others. But I also think that times like this, that this is where we hold to our values. We don't change them. We don't move them on. Our values are more important than ever when times are tough. And integrity is one of those core values that should never be negotiable. So I've no doubt that on the risk side of the equation, that risk will exist. That expediency might overcome the proper way of doing things. That human rights could be neglected because they don't matter temporarily while we're dealing with a crisis. But actually, integrity, human rights, all of the things we hold dear, we have to go on holding dear, and doing it in ways that recognise the big picture, that recognise what government needs to do in the face of the crisis, but really acting as that accountability mechanism to help ensure that we don't forget the things that make us what we are in all the good ways we need to retain.
And these are roles that all of you play in, as John put it earlier, imposing fairness or requesting and requiring that your businesses and your governments engage in a fair negotiation with their people. Judy, have you had to really amp up the response at this point? Have you got more staff on, or are you just waiting to see what happens next?
Well, it's we've got a few more staff on, just in our contact centre, to make sure that we can answer the phones when people call. We've had a tremendous response from our staff, our employees, in that transition to work from home. So they're actually finding, when they don't have to travel an hour and a half each way or an hour each way, that it's they are a bit more productive. But they are all really enjoying that opportunity, as I think John mentioned earlier, to work from home. So a few more staff, but not heaps at the moment. But we're watching very carefully. We don't want to get overwhelmed and not be able to respond. It's such an important time for people with phone and internet, and remaining connected is so important.
And Cynthia, I mean, clearly for energy and water as well, it's an essential. So are you anticipating that you might need to increase your numbers to respond, or are you quite comfortable?
I think we should be okay, but we are doing a lot of work at the moment, and this is where engagement with industry is really important. We rely on hearing from them what they think is going to happen, as much as what we haven't had a pandemic, so our past experience isn't going to be a great indicator of what future complaint volumes might look like. We have our seasonal impacts and those sorts of things, but not me, I'm not very good with numbers. There are people in my office that are madly crunching numbers at the moment to try and actually work out what the timing and scale of this is going to be, because that will, for us, really determine whether or not we need more staff. We're anticipating it will be later in the year. But again, it's a massive unknown, but we're bringing the best brains in the organisation to actually try and make the best decisions that we can.
Well, it sounds as if all of you have a strong eye to the horizon in terms of what might be coming and what sorts of issues might arise and the volume of them. Is there anything any of you would like to add in terms of the impact of COVID or the work of your ombudsman before we wrap?
Well, if I can jump in, I think it's really important for all of us that everybody knows that if they've got a problem with their government department or their local body or any of our industries, that we exist, that we're really easy to contact. Just jump on the phone, jump online and reach out to us, and we're here to help.
I would echo that, and not only a message to the public, but a message also to the agencies, to the corporates, to whoever we are overseeing, about the importance of good decision making, about the importance of discretion, about so far so good. We're seeing some good signs that that people are recognising the impact of this. But let's face it, we've barely scratched the surface of understanding what the impact of COVID-19 is going to be. And we are going to be tested, all of us, in so many different ways. And recognising that we are going to need to do things differently. We're going to need to think differently, not just applying the same rigid tests that we always have. Being flexible, being agile, being responsive. This is going to be more important than ever.
Yep, I think it's going to be a long haul, and we are all grateful as the denizens of Victoria that we have ombudsmen to look out for us, to take our complaints, and to watch the activities of corporates and governments. Thank you ever so much for your time. Have a great Law Week, and we appreciate your work very much indeed. Cynthia Gabert, who is the Energy and Water Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, Victorian Ombudsman, Judy Jones, who's the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, and John Price, who's the Lead Ombudsman Insurance with the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Thank you again for your time, and enjoy the rest of Law Week.